The stories. Why these ranger station receipts still don't add up. In the fall of 2016, a set of receipts found at a remote ranger station raised more questions than answers. The station sat near a state forest in northern Oregon, surrounded by tall fir trees and steep dirt trails. It was used mostly during summer fire patrols, but in October it was supposed to be empty. Yet someone had been there recently enough to leave coffee stains on the counter and fresh tire tracks outside. The main caretaker that year was a 41-year-old ranger named Ellis Grady. He had worked for the state forestry department for over a decade and was known for being organized. When Ellis went missing for 2 days in early November, his coworkers assumed his truck had broken down on the backroads again. He returned quietly that Wednesday morning, pale and distracted, claiming he had been checking fire cameras deeper in the valley. But when the office assistant filed his expense paperwork, she noticed something strange about his fuel receipts. The dates and amounts didn't match the department's card records. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? At first, no one paid much attention. Rangers often paid for fuel out of pocket and turned in the slips later. But the accounting team flagged the entries because they came from a gas station nearly 70 miles off his assigned patrol route. The receipts were time-stamped 2 nights before he returned, right around the time he was unreachable by radio. The manager called him in for a short meeting, but Ellis brushed it off, saying he must have grabbed the wrong slips. Then he went back to work like nothing had happened. 2 weeks later, the night duty ranger stopped at the same outpost and noticed the door unlocked. Inside, lights were on, and someone had clearly been there. Coffee was still warm in the mug, and a jacket hung on the hook near the door. A few papers sat on the counter, pinned under a half-eaten granola bar. When the ranger flipped one over, he saw a receipt from the same station near the coast, dated that very day. It had Ellis's signature at the bottom. When questioned again, Ellis looked shaken. He admitted he had been there that morning, but claimed he just liked driving the scenic route to clear his head. His supervisor didn't find that convincing. The ranger station wasn't even close to the coastal highway. The dirt road leading there was partially blocked by fallen branches from the last storm, and no patrol had been assigned west of the ridge in weeks. Later, one of the younger rangers named Lydia found Ellis's old logbook. Inside, the last few pages were torn out. The remaining entries mentioned several trips out to check Tower 17, a decommissioned lookout on a ridge above an old mining road. That tower had been boarded up for years after a small landslide shifted the foundation. Nobody was supposed to go near it, but the receipts, when mapped, showed a pattern leading right in that direction. In December, a state audit began. Investigators collected the receipts and compared timestamps with the department's truck GPS logs. The logs confirmed that Ellis's vehicle had gone off-route 3 times in late October. Each time, he stayed parked in the same area for several hours. No maintenance work or inspections had been scheduled there. When the auditors interviewed Ellis, he denied staying overnight and insisted the logs were inaccurate. Still, his supervisor noticed the smell of mildew and campfire smoke on his jacket, as if he had been sleeping outdoors. A retired ranger named Hal, who used to work those trails, came forward after hearing rumors. He told the auditors that Tower 17 wasn't completely empty. Inside the storage room below the lookout floor, there were boxes of old survey records and equipment, some of which had been used decades earlier to mark water boundaries. He said if anyone wanted to hide something out there, it would go unnoticed for months. That prompted a small search. 2 rangers and a deputy hiked up to the ridge on a mild January morning. They found tire tracks that matched the department vehicle and a flattened patch of grass behind the tower. Inside, they found the storage boxes Hal mentioned. Most were filled with faded maps and water samples sealed in glass jars. But under one box was a torn envelope containing several small gas receipts folded together. Each had Ellis's handwriting and the same coastal gas station stamp. When Ellis was told about this discovery, he reportedly said, "Then someone's messing with me." He claimed he had never been inside that tower and suggested maybe someone else had used his name. But handwriting experts later confirmed that the signatures were consistent with his previous expense forms. It wasn't conclusive evidence of wrongdoing, but it didn't make sense either. The total fuel listed on those receipts was more than his truck could even hold. The Forest Department quietly placed Ellis on leave while they continued looking into what he was doing on those off-route trips. They interviewed people from nearby towns, asking if anyone had seen a white government pickup in late October. A mechanic from a service station 20 miles south recalled a man in a ranger uniform buying fuel from a portable drum around that time. He couldn't be sure it was Ellis, but he remembered the guy paid cash and seemed in a hurry. By early spring, the case went cold. The department moved on, Ellis resigned, and the receipts were boxed up with the rest of the audit files. But in 2019, a new ranger named Theo discovered something while clearing out the same outpost. He found a metal coffee tin hidden behind a loose board under the counter. Inside were several folded papers, damp but legible. They were fuel receipts again, all from that same coastal station. The latest date was November 3rd, 2016, the night Ellis had gone missing. Each receipt had strange notes scribbled on the back. One read, "No radio past Ridge." Another said, "3 lights south of tower." The handwriting matched Ellis's older logs. The department contacted him again, but he refused to comment. A few weeks later, he reportedly moved to Montana and stopped responding to emails. Since then, the receipts have been filed in the regional archive. Some employees still talk about the case, mostly as a cautionary tale. Every few years, new staff find copies during routine checks and bring them up again, wondering what he was doing out there. The gas station itself closed down in 2017, so no new records could be verified. The old cashier who worked there remembered a quiet man in uniform coming in several times that fall, always after midnight, always buying coffee and fuel, never talking much. No criminal charges were ever filed. The department concluded there wasn't enough evidence to prove misconduct, only inconsistencies in the paperwork. Yet to this day, those ranger station receipts still don't add up. Some say Ellis was running a side job with off-book fuel sales. Others think he was covering up something that happened near that old tower. But whatever the truth was, it remains buried somewhere in the hills beyond the ridge, where the radios still go silent and the trail signs fade away each winter. A ghost ship drifted into port with a fresh meal on the stove. It was the winter of 1987 when the fishing trawler Marianne V slipped silently into the harbor of Gloucester, Massachusetts, just before dawn on a brittle February morning. No lights flickered from her deck, no voices called out, no radio signals preceded her arrival. She came like a shadow drifting through fog, her bow nudging gently against Pier 6 as if guided by unseen hands. The first to notice her was Elias Thorne, a weathered dockhand with 40 years of salt in his bones and frost still clinging to the brim of his wool cap. He'd arrived early to check lobster traps, steam rising from his coffee cup curling into the pale gray sky. When he saw the vessel listing slightly, paint peeling like old skin, name barely legible beneath grime, he froze. His breath caught, not from cold, but from instinct. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Elias approached slowly, boots crunching over frozen patches of seaweed and ice. The Marianne V had been reported missing 3 weeks prior, last seen off the Georges Bank during a sudden nor'easter that had swallowed 2 other boats whole. The Coast Guard had called off search efforts after 10 days, assuming all hands lost, and yet here she was, intact, afloat, and strangely, undisturbed. No signs of storm damage, no gaping holes in the hull, nothing overturned on deck, just silence. A thick, suffocating silence that pressed against Elias's ears like cotton. He called out once, twice, no answer. Then, steeling himself, he climbed aboard. The moment his boot touched the deck, he felt it a chill that wasn't from the wind. It coiled up from the wood beneath him, sharp and unnatural, as though the ship itself were holding its breath. He moved toward the wheelhouse. The door hung open, swaying slightly with the motion of the tide. Inside, the radio crackled with static, a faint loop of Morse code repeating endlessly 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots, SOS, over and over, though the power should have been dead. The logbook lay open on the chart table, the last entry dated February 3rd. Heavy fog. Currents erratic. Can't see land. Something in the water. The handwriting grew jagged, frantic, as if written under duress. Elias flipped back a few pages. Earlier entries spoke of routine hauls, calm seas, even jokes about Captain Rourke's terrible stew. But then, around January 28th, the tone shifted. Crew restless. Emery claims he saw lights beneath the surface, not bioluminescence, too steady, too deep. Emery Vale, third mate, quiet man from inland Maine who rarely spoke unless spoken to. He'd joined the crew only 2 months prior, replacing a man who'd quit mid-season, saying the boat felt haunted. Emery hadn't believed in ghosts, or so the others said. But his journal, found later tucked inside a duffel bag below decks, told a different story. Elias descended the narrow metal stairs into the galley, flashlight beam trembling in his grip, and there, on the cast iron stove, sat a pot, still warm. Steam curled lazily from its cracked lid, carrying the scent of onions, potatoes, and something meaty beef, maybe, or pork. A spoon rested against the rim, crusted with congealing gravy. Beside it, a chipped blue mug held tea, long gone cold, but unmistakably brewed that morning. Or the night before. Or whenever. Time didn't seem to matter here. He backed away, heart hammering. No one could have boarded without being seen. The harbor was monitored, no small craft had entered after midnight, and yet the meal was fresh. As if someone had stepped away just seconds ago. Then he heard it. A soft clink. From the mess hall, like a fork tapping a plate. He turned slowly. The door stood ajar. Darkness pooled beyond it. He pushed it open with the toe of his boot. Tables bolted to the floor, benches intact, nothing out of place. Except on the farthest table, set for four plates, each with a portion of stew untouched, forks laid neatly beside them, napkins folded, salt and pepper shakers aligned perfectly. And at the head of the table, a fifth plate, empty. But the chair was pulled out, as if someone had just risen. Elias didn't scream, he didn't run, he simply stood there, flashlight shaking, breath coming in short white puffs, until the sound came, again not a clink this time, but a whisper, faint, guttural, from the sleeping quarters below. He didn't go down, not then. He scrambled back onto the pier, shouting for help, voice raw with panic. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, the pot on the stove was cold, the steam had vanished. But the stew remained, uneaten, perfectly preserved, as if time had paused mid-bite. Captain Silas Rourke, grizzled veteran of 30 seasons at sea, was never found. Nor were his 3 crewmen, Emery Vale, Harlan Pike, and Jocelyn Crow, the youngest at 23, who'd signed on to save money for nursing school in Portland. Their personal effects were still in their bunks. Photos of family, letters half-written, toothbrushes damp. But no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, just absence. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. Divers scoured the hull, sonar scanned the seabed, forensic teams analyzed the stew, confirmed it contained beef, carrots, and barley, cooked within hours of the ship's arrival. No toxins, no hallucinogens, nothing abnormal. Yet every sailor who boarded the Marianne V afterward reported the same thing. The smell of cooking food, even when the stove was cold, the sensation of being watched from empty rooms, whispers in low, guttural tones, always just beyond hearing. One junior officer, Lyle Mander, claimed he saw Emery Vale standing at the railing at 3:17 in the morning, staring into the fog, mouthing words he couldn't understand. When approached, the figure dissolved like mist. The ship was towed to dry dock, declared unsalvageable not due to structural damage, but because morale among crews plummeted. Men refused to work on her. Mechanics reported tools going missing, only to reappear in locked lockers. Electricians swore lights turned on by themselves, dim and flickering, casting long shadows that moved against the walls. By April, the decision was made. The Marianne V would be scuttled, sunk in deep water beyond the continental shelf, where currents would carry her far from shipping lanes. The ceremony was brief. No flags, no speeches, just a single flare shot into the twilight sky as charges detonated along her keel. She sank slowly, bow first, vanishing beneath the waves with an almost ceremonial grace. But here's what they didn't report, what never made the official logs. 3 days later, a Norwegian freighter, the Fjordwind, radioed the Boston Maritime Authority from 50 miles east of Sable Island. They'd spotted wreckage, part of a wooden table, scorched at the edges, floating amid a slick of oil. Attached to it, miraculously preserved in a sealed plastic sleeve, was a page torn from Emery Vale's journal. The handwriting was frantic, ink smudged as if written in haste or fear. "They're not dead. We never left. The ship doesn't sink. It drifts, it waits, it feeds. The stove is always warm, the table is always set, and one day it will come back. With a fresh meal. For us." The page was authenticated, handwriting matched samples from Emery's personnel file, ink consistent with pens issued to crew, but how it survived explosion, fire, and ocean pressure, no scientist could explain. And then, on the evening of December 9th, 2012, a local fisherman named Corwin Haskins reported seeing a vessel matching the Marianne V's description near Jeffrey's Ledge. Fog was heavy that night, visibility near zero. He claimed the ship passed within 20 feet of his boat, lights dark, decks empty. But from her galley window, a yellow glow pulsed like a stove lit below. He tried hailing her, no response. When he turned to grab his radio, she was gone. Vanished into the mist. No wreckage was found, no trace on radar. The Coast Guard dismissed it as a mirage, a trick of the light. But Corwin insisted, said he smelled stew in the air, beef, carrots, barley, and underneath something darker, metallic, like blood. To this day, Gloucester fishermen avoid that stretch of water after sunset, especially in winter, especially when the fog rolls in thick and silent. Some say if you listen closely on still nights, you can hear the Morse code 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots echoing from beneath the waves. Others claim to see a faint glow beneath the surface, drifting with the current like a lantern in the deep. And every year, around February 10th, a single bouquet of wilted wildflowers appears on the railing of Pier 6. No note, no signature. Just flowers brown at the edges, salt stiffened, as if carried across the sea. Left there, some say, by someone who never came home. But perhaps the most unsettling detail, the one that lingers in the mind long after the story ends, is this. When authorities finally cleaned out the galley before scuttling the ship, they found something odd in the cupboard. A can of stew. Store-bought, label faded, best before date, October 12th, 1986. Expired over a year earlier, yet the can was warm to the touch. And when opened, it was full. Steaming. Fresh. As if just heated. No one ate it. It was incinerated along with the rest. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right through the rigging of moored boats, people swear they can smell it, that rich, savory aroma. Onions, potatoes, meat slow-cooked for hours. And they wonder, who was it meant for? And more importantly, is the table still set? The sea keeps its secrets well, but every now and then, it returns them to drift into port, unannounced, uninvited, with a fresh meal on the stove and chairs waiting to be filled. So the next time you walk past an empty dock and the wind carries the faint scent of cooking food, ask yourself, was that the neighbor's dinner? Or something else? Something older? Something hungrier? Something that remembers your name and knows when you'll be home?
The stories. This abandoned cabin blueprint exposed a secret crawlspace. The cabin looked ordinary in photos, yet the archived blueprint flagged one space that did not exist on site. Local records listed a one-bedroom layout, but the drawing showed a narrow service void marked beneath the living room. Silas Bergen was 36, and he worked as a county compliance inspector who handled delinquent properties before auction. He drove out on a gray weekday to walk the structure, photograph hazards, and confirm that the layout matched the file. The place sat off a 2-lane road that wound through pines with a creek down behind the lot. The roofline sagged over a porch stripped of rails, and the windows held plastic sheeting taped from the inside. He unlocked the door with a temporary code from asset management, and he called out to clear the space. The air smelled like wet wood and dust, and a fleck of ash drifted when he stepped on a warped plank. His plan was simple: walk clockwise and document each room, then compare notes to the blueprint. He had a body cam that synced to a phone, and he kept a paper checklist clipped to a thin clipboard. The front room matched the drawing in size, yet the joists underneath felt different when he tapped the floor. The sound was dull near the hearth, then strangely hollow near the wall that faced the porch.
He paused and studied the print, which carried a date stamp from 1996 and a contractor name. The sheet showed a 6-foot by 3-foot chase for ducting, labeled unfinished, with access from a panel. There was no panel visible, and there were no vents large enough to match the dimensions. He measured along the baseboard with a tape, then marked the chalk line where the void should begin. Silas had done 100 inspections, and he knew when a wall tried to hide something. He set a small level against the trim, then noticed the paint edge looked newer than the room around it. He kept going through the kitchen, where a backed-up sink had left a ring around the basin. A calendar on the wall had pages stuck together, all from 2002, with a fishing cartoon printed on top. He took photos of the wiring, which showed cloth wrap at the outlets, and a modern breaker added later. The breaker ran a separate conduit along the sill, then vanished behind the same living room wall. That mismatch bothered him, so he called the records clerk who had pulled the blueprint the day before. She was retired, but still contracted hourly, and she said the sheet came from a permit request that was never finalized. She added one strange footnote from the parcel folder, which she read out in a careful voice. A handwritten note stated that a neighboring caller reported periodic hammering at night, then sudden silence before daybreak. Silas thanked her, then he checked the porch wall again, and he laid on the floor to sight the baseboard. A thin seam ran under the lowest plank, and a pothook sat in the floor beside the hearth bricks. He tugged the hook, and nothing moved, but the plank next to it shifted slightly when he leaned. He slipped a pry bar under the edge and felt the hidden nail heads give a little under pressure. He stopped and photographed everything, then he made a note to treat the space like a confined area. He lifted the plank a few inches, and the smell from below was cool and mineral, like a cellar after rain. A rectangular cavity dropped 4 feet, then leveled into a crawl space that ran along the living room footprint. The sides were lined with old plywood, and someone had stapled foil-faced insulation in a patchwork grid. He climbed down with gloves, then took a careful crawl on elbows while the body cam light cut the darkness. Dust turned to packed silt, and the foil rustled against his jacket whenever his shoulder grazed the wall. 5 feet in, the crawl space opened into a small wedge where 2 joists had been doubled. A wire ran across the wedge and disappeared through a hole toward the porch, wrapped in black electrical tape. He traced the wire with a finger, then backed out and stepped onto the porch to search for the exit. The wire emerged under the porch bench, fed into a steel box, and terminated at what looked like a switch. The switch was taped into the off position, and the tape had a date written on it, 2005. Next to the switch, a second small box sat empty, with screw marks around a rectangle that once held something. He documented both boxes, then returned to the living room and eased into the void again. The path hooked left and began to slope down, as if someone had carved a shallow ramp under the wall. At the bottom of the ramp, he found a round hole cut cleanly through a concrete footing. The edge had been brushed with some kind of sealant, and faint black scuffs ran along the rim like scrape marks. He slid his phone through the hole and snapped a burst of shots while the flash bounced off damp earth. The images showed a low chamber beyond, supported by sandbags, with a lattice of pallets stacked into a platform. He measured the diameter of the hole with the tape, then radioed his office line to note the confined entry. He did not squeeze through, but he reached his arm further and felt air moving from the chamber. That air smelled like creek water and old leaves, which suggested a connection to the drainage cut behind the lot. He crawled out and circled the property line until he reached the bank where the creek curved north. There, he found a culvert from the road ditch that emptied toward the creek, with riprap hiding several small cavities. One cavity had a plywood face painted to match the stones, and the bottom edge hung loose in the mud. Silas lifted the panel and saw the pallet lattice that matched his phone photos from the interior side. It formed a short tunnel that led back toward the footing hole, shielded from view by the stones and brush. He photographed the culvert from the roadside, then returned to the porch and sat on the step to think. The blueprint had shown a void, and here it was, but the finishing work suggested someone had expanded it well beyond code. Before he called anyone, he walked next door to the only occupied house, a retired welder named Arlen Pike. Arlen was 70, and he looked careful the way men do after years of measuring metal with their eyes. Arlen said the cabin had belonged to a seasonal caretaker who used to plow the track in winter. He remembered hearing light clanking late on some nights, like tools hitting pipe, then a truck idling near the turnout. Silas asked if anyone had lived there after the caretaker left, and Arlen shook his head. He said the place sat empty for years, then one spring, the porch got new paint, and then the power went off again. Arlen added that the road had seen a string of petty thefts around 2005, according to a local newsletter. Coolers, gas cans, and toolboxes disappeared from pickups at the turnout while people hiked the trail. Back inside, Silas opened the kitchen drawer that held mailers, and he found a utility notice dated 2005. The notice warned of irregular off-peak usage with spikes overnight that did not fit seasonal patterns. He called the utility office and asked for the archived meter notes, which a supervisor read while on speaker. The notes recorded low daytime load, then narrow spikes around midnight, and a flag that led to a field check. According to the supervisor, the field tech reported the panel was locked, yet an extra breaker ran to an unknown device. The tech noted a switch near the porch that controlled a separate line, which the owner had taped off. Silas thanked them and returned to the crawlspace, then placed a small magnet near the taped switch. The switch held power after the breaker, so the taped position likely disabled the line that fed the tunnel area. He considered why someone would build a clean conduit between a culvert and a living room. It could be smuggling, or a shady storm shelter, or a quiet way to enter and exit without a porch light turning on. He called the records clerk again and asked if the blueprint contractor had ever filed completion documents. She said the contractor died in 2004 and no one else filed amendments, which left the void uninspected. Silas pulled county incident logs from a public terminal at the office, then filtered for the turnout mile marker. Several entries from 2003 to 2005 mentioned car break-ins during trail hours. One dispatcher note mentioned a caller who thought someone moved under the road's surface near the culvert stones. The caller said the stones rattled like a grate being shifted, then a flashlight beam flickered out toward the creek. Silas visited the small volunteer station where a retired dispatcher still came in to organize training materials. She remembered a prank call trend that year, but she also remembered one credible tip from a hiker who left a name. The hiker, whose name he will not repeat, reported hearing a handheld scanner from inside the culvert during a busy weekend. The voice read license plates quietly, then said clear when a driver left a truck unlocked near the turnout. Back at the cabin, Silas checked the crawl again, and this time he saw faint letters printed on the foil facing. The letters matched a brand of insulated soundboard used in rehearsal rooms to dampen noise without thick walls. He scanned the chamber beyond the footing hole one more time and noticed zip tie heads gleaming along the pallet edges. The ties secured a cable run that likely held a small camera at culvert height aimed at the turnout path. He followed the cable to a break near the pallet mouth where critters had chewed through and left frayed copper. There, he also found a torn plastic sleeve that once held memory cards stuck in the silt beside the beam. Silas collected nothing, but he documented every detail from 4 angles, then filed a report that afternoon. The report asked for a confined space entry team to clear the chamber, then to photograph any equipment left inside. The team scheduled for the next morning, and Silas returned to watch them work while he stood above the crawl. They suited up with masks, slid in carefully, and passed up 4 items, all tagged and bagged for inventory. The items included a small VHF scanner, a smashed action camera, a handwritten log, and a lock with a cut shackle. The log listed dates, truck descriptions, and short notes like cooler, gas can, or tool chest, all marked with times. At the bottom of the log, a few lines mentioned a code word he had heard on the dispatcher note. The writer kept track of the word clear after reading a plate quietly, which matched the hiker account from that season. Silas wrote an addendum that evening that tied the blueprint to the crawlspace and the culvert method. He mapped the route from turnout to pallet chamber, then to the footing hole and the living room lift point. It was crude, yet it was efficient for someone who needed to vanish when headlights turned down the road. A person could slip under the riprap, cut the feed with the switch, stash gear, then rise through the floor and wait out patrols. 2 weeks later, the county closed the chamber with concrete, and asset management stripped the porch to studs. No charges appear in public record related to the log, which suggests the writer was either gone or unidentifiable. Arlen watched the work from his fence and said it explained the trucks that idled without drivers toward midnight. He said he had chalked it up to fishermen, but the old culvert trick made more sense when joined to the blueprint. Silas requested the utility to send him a copy of their night spike graph for his file notes. The graph showed narrow peaks around midnight, which matched the switch relay cycling, while equipment ran briefly under the floor. Years later, people still hike that turnout, and most know nothing about the pallet chamber under the stones. The cabin has new owners who kept the footprint, yet they asked the county to certify the slab as filled and sealed. The story holds because the file trail fits together and the parts line up with patient logic rather than thrill. A retired dispatcher kept the hand note that matched the log, and a utility supervisor verified the meter pattern. Silas keeps a copy of the 1996 blueprint in a drawer, with the void circled and dated in fresh ink. He says the strangest things in his job are the simplest, like a floor that sounds wrong when you tap it carefully. He never found a name to attach to the log, and there was no need to guess beyond the evidence. It took a thrift store scanner, a pallet stack, and a switch by a porch bench to run a silent route. The blueprint did not expose a treasure, and there was no buried room filled with cash, which makes it credible. It revealed a crawl space that served as a passage, built after a contractor died, and used for quick escapes. If anyone asks why the story stayed quiet, the answer is practical, and it does not involve secrecy or fear. The chamber is sealed, the turnout is patrolled, and the lesson remains written on a sheet that outlived its builder. He still taps floors on inspections and listens for that hollow change that means someone altered a plan. Most houses tell on themselves if you let them, and a blueprint can whisper where a person once chose to hide.
Ohio's vanishing room legend turned out to be a crime scene. In the quiet, rolling hills of southeastern Ohio, where the trees grow thick and the fog clings to the valley long after sunrise, there stands an old farmhouse just off State Route 327, near the unincorporated community of Gloucester. The structure, weathered by decades of wind and rain, has stood vacant since the late 1980s, its windows shattered, its roof sagging under the weight of time. Locals have long avoided it, not out of mere disrepair, but because of a story whispered in hushed tones at county fairs and over coffee at roadside diners. They call it the Vanishing Room, a place said to swallow people whole, never to be seen again. For years, it was dismissed as folklore, a ghost tale spun to scare children from wandering too far into the woods. But in the autumn of 2017, when a young man named Thaddeus Mallory disappeared without a trace, the legend took a chilling turn, because what investigators found behind those crumbling walls wasn't a myth, it was a crime scene. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was on a crisp morning in early October, the kind where the air smells faintly of damp leaves and wood smoke curls from distant chimneys, that Sheriff Elias Crane received the call. A missing person report had been filed by the elderly aunt of Thaddeus Mallory, a 23-year-old aspiring photographer from Athens, Ohio. Thaddeus had told her he was going to explore some abandoned properties for a photo series titled Forgotten Corners. His last known message, sent via text at 6:47 in the evening on October 3rd, read, "Found something strange at the Gloucester house. The back room doesn't match the floor plan. Walls feel wrong." Then, silence. Sheriff Crane, a man with 31 years on the force and a face lined by both sun and sorrow, knew the Gloucester house by reputation only. He'd heard the stories of hikers who claimed they entered the house and exited miles away, of teenagers who swore they saw a door where none should be, opening into a space that defied logic. But he was a practical man, grounded in evidence, not superstition. Still, when no sign of Thaddeus turned up after 2 days, not at his apartment, not at his favorite diner, not even on surveillance footage from the gas station on Route 59, he ordered a search of the property. The team arrived just after dawn on October 6th, their breath visible in the pale light. The house loomed ahead, surrounded by knee-high weeds and rusted farm equipment half swallowed by the earth.
Deputy Marlowe, a rookie with nerves tighter than a snare drum, led the way, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. The front door groaned open with a sound like a dying animal, releasing a wave of cold, stale air that carried the scent of mildew and something sharper, something metallic. Inside, the house was eerily intact. Dust coated every surface, but there were no signs of forced entry, no broken furniture, no struggle. It was as if time had simply stopped. Photographs still hung crooked on the walls, a calendar from 1986 frozen on the month of July. Sheriff Crane moved through the kitchen, then the parlor, calling out Thaddeus's name, his voice echoing through the hollow rooms. Nothing answered. Then they reached the hallway. It was here that things began to feel off. The corridor seemed longer than it should have been, stretching farther than the exterior walls allowed. The floorboards creaked unevenly, and the wallpaper, once floral, now peeling in long strips, pulsed faintly in the draft, as though breathing. Deputy Marlowe paused, turning to the sheriff. "Sir, did we pass that door before?" he asked, pointing to a narrow paneled entrance on the left. Crane frowned. He didn't remember it. They opened it. Beyond lay a small room no more than 10 feet by 12, but everything about it felt unnatural. The ceiling sloped downward at an impossible angle, though the house outside had a flat roof. The walls were covered in crude symbols, drawn in what later tests would confirm as human blood, layered over decades. And in the center of the floor, a circle had been etched into the wood, filled with ash and bone fragments. Most disturbing of all, the room had no window, yet a faint greenish light seemed to emanate from the corners, flickering like old television static. Sheriff Crane's radio crackled. "We've got movement on thermal," came the voice of Officer Lyle, stationed outside. "Two figures, inside the house. One near the back hall. The other, sir. The second heat signature is coming from inside the west wall." Crane turned slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the dust. There was no west wall in this room, it faced north. His pulse quickened. He stepped toward the northern wall, pressing his palm against the plaster. It gave slightly, like soft clay. He pushed harder, and his hand sank through. He yanked it back with a gasp. The hole sealed itself instantly, leaving no mark. "This isn't possible," Marlowe whispered, backing away. "This isn't real." But it was real. And worse, it was occupied. Later analysis would reveal traces of DMT and other hallucinogenic compounds in the air, suggesting someone had been burning psychoactive substances to induce altered states. But forensic teams also uncovered human remains buried beneath the floorboards, 3 sets of bones, carbon dated to the 1970s, 80s, and early 2000s. Dental records confirmed one belonged to a woman named Elspeth Vorn, reported missing in 1979 after telling friends she was investigating a doorway to another place in rural Ohio. And then there was Thaddeus. On October 9th, during a second sweep of the property, K-9 Unit Officer Renata Cho discovered a trapdoor hidden beneath a collapsed section of the basement. Behind it, a narrow tunnel descended into darkness. The walls were lined with photographs, dozens of them taken inside the vanishing room. Faces stared out from the images, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. Among them was Thaddeus, captured mid-stride, unaware, seconds before vanishing from the known world. At the end of the tunnel, they found him, not alive. Not exactly. His body was seated upright, propped against the stone wall, dressed in the same clothes he'd worn the night he disappeared. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were open, pupils dilated, fixed on a point beyond the ceiling. In his lap lay a leather-bound journal filled with frantic handwriting, sketches of shifting corridors, spiraling staircases leading nowhere, and repeated phrases, "It watches, it learns. It remembers names." The final entry, dated October 4th, just 1 day after his last text read, "I think I'm still here. I think I never left, but something else is wearing my face now. If you find this, don't go back, don't look for the door, it knows you're looking, it's always listening." The case was officially closed in March of 2018. Authorities cited homicide, though no suspect was ever identified. The house was condemned and scheduled for demolition, but crews refused to touch it. Dynamite placed at the foundation failed to detonate. Bulldozers stalled mid-approach, engines dead despite full tanks. Eventually, the state erected a chain-link fence around the property, topped with barbed wire, and posted warning signs, "No trespassing, hazardous structure." Yet, even now, nearly 7 years later, locals report seeing lights in the windows on foggy nights. Hunters claim to hear whispers drifting through the trees, voices calling names of people who've never been to Gloucester. And sometimes, on the edge of sleep, residents swear they feel a pressure behind their eyes, a sensation of being pulled not forward, but sideways into a space that shouldn't exist. The vanishing room, it seems, is not done, and perhaps it never will be. Because legends don't die in places like Ohio. They wait, they breathe, they grow hungry. And they remember. Thaddeus Mallory was not the first. He certainly won't be the last. So the next time you drive down a lonely road, past a house that looks just a little too still, a little too quiet, ask yourself, does the layout make sense? Do the doors line up? And when you pass by, do you feel, just for a second, as though the air has thickened and something on the other side of the wall has noticed you? Be careful. Some rooms don't let go. Some doors only open one way. And some houses, like the one near Gloucester, standing sentinel in the mist, don't just hold secrets, they feed on them. The investigation remained open for months, though leads dried up faster than puddles in summer heat. Psychologists analyzed Thaddeus's journal, concluding he likely suffered a psychotic break induced by toxins or isolation. Skeptics pointed to mold, carbon monoxide, or underground gas leaks as explanations for the hallucinations, but none could explain the photos. None could explain how his body appeared untouched by decay, preserved in a state that defied medical understanding. And no scientist could replicate the phenomenon of the shifting walls, the impossible geometry, the way the room seemed to exist outside normal dimensions. Dr. Corvin Hexton, a parapsychologist from Case Western Reserve University, visited the site in May of 2018. He brought with him electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, and a team of graduate students. They spent 3 days collecting data. On the evening of the third day, Hexton entered the vanishing room alone, determined to meditate and record any anomalies. He never came out. Search parties combed the area for weeks. His equipment was found scattered near the basement entrance, cameras smashed, notebooks burned, audio recorders filled with static, and, at one point, a whisper in Hexton's voice, "It showed me the others." They're still walking. They don't know they're dead. After that, the state declared the property off-limits indefinitely. The fence was reinforced, motion sensors installed, helicopter flyovers increased. But still, the stories persist. In 2022, a drone operated by a storm chaser caught footage of the house during a thunderstorm. In one frame, clear, undeniable, the back door opens. A figure steps out. Tall, thin, wearing a coat that flaps in a wind no one else feels. The face is blurred, distorted, as if reality itself refuses to focus on it, and in its hand, it holds a camera. Thaddeus's camera. The video went viral, then vanished from the internet within hours, pulled by unknown authorities. The storm chaser claimed he received a visit from men in dark suits who said nothing, only handed him a sealed envelope and left. Inside was a single photograph, his own face, taken from inside his bedroom sometime during the night. No one believes him, but those who've studied the vanishing room know the truth. It doesn't just take people, it replaces them, and the ones who come back aren't really back at all. They're echoes. Echoes with instructions. Now consider this. When you walk through your home, do you count the doors? Do you notice if the hallway feels longer today than it did yesterday? Have you ever stood in a room and thought, just for a moment, that the walls leaned in slightly, as if listening? Because somewhere, deep in the heart of Ohio, a room waits. A room with no right to exist. A room that remembers every footstep, every breath, every name spoken within its walls. And if you listen closely, on the very edge of silence, you might hear it. Not a creak, not the wind, but a whisper, calling yours. 1972 prophecy predicted the end. What happened next is worse. It was the winter of 1972 when a quiet tremor passed through the small town of Black Hollow, nestled deep in the Appalachian foothills of eastern Kentucky. Snow had begun to fall early that December, blanketing the crooked rooftops and winding dirt roads in a hush so thick it seemed to muffle even thought itself. The air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, and the few residents who braved the cold moved with slow, deliberate steps, boots crunching over frost-laced gravel, breath curling into ghostly wisps beneath flickering porch lights. At the edge of town, near where the old railroad tracks disappeared into the misty woods, stood a crumbling stone chapel, long abandoned, save for the occasional drifter or curious teenager daring each other to go inside after dark. The chapel had once belonged to a short-lived religious sect known as the Covenant of the Final Dawn, a group that sprang up in the late 1960s, led by a man named Thaddeus Vale, whose sermons spoke not of salvation, but of reckoning. He claimed to have received visions during a near-fatal fever in the summer of 1968, visions of fire falling from the sky, of cities sinking into silence, of a great stillness descending upon the earth like a shroud. His followers, no more than 30 at their peak, built the chapel themselves using river stones and salvaged timber, believing it would serve as a sanctuary when the end came. And according to Vale's final prophecy, inscribed in charcoal on the chapel's inner wall just days before he vanished without a trace, the end would arrive precisely at 3:17 in the morning on December 21st, 1972. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Now, nearly 5 decades later, the date stirs faint echoes in those who remember. Not because the world ended that night, but because something far more unsettling took place instead. Something that didn't make the newspapers, wasn't captured by radio signals, and left behind only whispers buried beneath layers of denial and disbelief. That evening, a handful of townspeople gathered at the general store, run then by Eldon Mirth, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a habit of speaking in riddles. He kept an old wind-up clock above the counter that never quite matched the time on anyone's wristwatch. By 7 o'clock, the store was unusually full. Minnie Galloway, the postmistress, sat knitting by the pot-bellied stove, her fingers trembling slightly as she looped the yarn. Young Corwin Bellwether, barely 16, leaned against the glass case of penny candy, staring out at the snowfall with a look of eerie calm. And in the back corner, nursing a cup of black coffee, sat Lyrael Crane, a woman who'd arrived in Black Hollow only weeks earlier, claiming to be researching local folklore for a university in Ohio. She wore a long wool coat, the color of dried blood, and her voice, when she spoke, was low and measured, like water moving under ice. They weren't there by accident. Each had heard the rumors. Some said Vale had returned. Others whispered that the ground beneath the chapel had begun to hum at night, vibrating like a plucked wire. A few children reported seeing figures standing among the trees' tall, thin shapes, with no faces, just smooth skin where features should be. And then there was the dream. Dozens of people across the county claimed to have had the same one within days of each other. A vast, silent field under a bruised purple sky, where rows of empty chairs stretched endlessly toward a horizon that pulsed like a heartbeat. In the dream, someone or something was waiting for them, but no one could remember who. At 9:42 p.m., the power went out. Not just in Black Hollow. Every home, every streetlight, every radio tower within a 30-mile radius lost electricity simultaneously. The darkness was absolute. No stars pierced the clouds. No moon cast its glow. Even the snow seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Inside the store, Eldon lit a kerosene lamp, its flame casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. No one spoke. Outside, the wind died. The snow stopped falling mid-air, suspended in glittering crystals that hung motionless between earth and sky. Then, at exactly 2:58 a.m., the clock above the counter began to chime. This was impossible. It was a wind-up clock. It hadn't worked properly in years, and yet it rang 12 times, each tone deep and resonant like a bell tolling underwater. When it finished, Lyrael stood slowly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. "It's starting," she said. Her voice did not waver. He wasn't wrong, he just misunderstood. No one moved. Corwin's hands clenched around the edge of the candy case. Minnie dropped her knitting, the needles clattering to the floor. Eldon stared at the clock, his face pale, lips parted as if trying to form words that wouldn't come. At 3:17 a.m., the exact moment prophesied, something shifted. It wasn't an explosion. Not an earthquake, not even a sound at first. It was a sensation, as if the air itself had grown thinner, as if reality had exhaled and forgotten to inhale again. The suspended snowflakes began to fall once more, but slowly, too slowly, like sand through an hourglass turned sideways. Then, from the direction of the chapel, a single note rose a tone so pure and high it made the teeth ache. It lasted only seconds before fading into silence. And then, the lights returned. Electricity surged back through the lines, radios crackled to life with static, the clock above the counter stopped chiming, frozen once more at 10 past 10. Outside, the snow fell normally, birds chirped in the trees. The world seemed unchanged. But it wasn't. Over the next few days, things began to unravel, not all at once, but in quiet, insidious ways. People reported missing hours. Corwin swore he'd walked to the chapel that night, though his boots were dry and untouched by snow. Minnie found letters in her mailbox addressed to people who had died years ago, written in handwriting she recognized but couldn't place. Eldon discovered that his wind-up clock now ran backward, its hands creeping counterclockwise with unnerving precision. And Lirael? She disappeared the next morning, leaving behind only a notebook filled with symbols and dates. Dates that stretched far beyond 1972, looping forward into the 21st century and beyond. One page bore a single sentence written in careful script. The end did not come. It arrived earlier, and we simply failed to notice. Black Hollow never recovered its sense of normalcy. Not really. Children born after that winter often spoke of dreams they couldn't explain, of standing in line, barefoot on cold stone, waiting to cross a bridge that led nowhere. Some grew up unable to feel fear. Others could not cry. A few claimed they remembered lives they'd never lived, names they'd never been given, cities that didn't exist on any map. The government eventually sent investigators, men in dark coats, who asked questions but took no notes. They visited the chapel, found nothing but dust and mildew, and declared the site structurally unsound. It was demolished in the spring of 1973. No records remain of what they may have seen or chosen to ignore. Yet, the strangest part isn't what happened that night, it's what continues to happen. Because every December 21st at precisely 3:17 in the morning, clocks across the region stop. Not all of them, just enough. And in homes near the old rail line, people wake suddenly, hearts pounding, convinced someone has just whispered their name, the air grows thick, breathing becomes difficult, and for exactly 13 seconds, the world feels hollow, as if something vital has been removed, replaced by a perfect, echoing absence. Scientists have offered theories, geomagnetic anomalies, infrasound waves, mass hallucination triggered by seasonal affective disorder, but none can explain why dogs refuse to bark during those seconds. Why newborns delivered at that exact time never cry. Why, in rare cases, individuals report seeing a figure standing at the foot of their bed, tall, gaunt, wearing a long coat, holding a notebook open in one hand, writing steadily with the other. And perhaps most chilling of all, why some who experience it claim to recognize the figure. Not from photographs, not from stories, but from dreams. From memories that don't belong to them. In the years since, scattered accounts have surfaced, letters tucked into library books, audio recordings uploaded to obscure corners of the internet, diary entries found in attics after the owners have passed. All speak of the same phenomenon, all mention the date. All describe that 13th second, the pause in existence, the breath held too long, the sense that something ancient and patient is watching, waiting, counting. One such account came from a retired schoolteacher in rural Indiana, writing in 2015. I was only 6 when it happened, but I remember the silence. My mother used to say, the world stopped spinning for a moment. I didn't believe her until I felt it again last year. It's getting longer. Not much, maybe half a second more than before, but it's growing. And I hear them now, faintly, like voices through a wall. They're calling names, not ours, names from before. Another, a geologist working in New Mexico, recorded a series of seismic readings taken on December 21st, 2019. His instruments detected no earthquake, no tremor, just a single, isolated pulse of energy emanating from somewhere deep beneath the Appalachian Range. The waveform resembled nothing natural. It looked, he wrote, like a heartbeat, but one that shouldn't exist. And then there's the recording, widely dismissed as a hoax, that surfaced on a now-deleted podcast in 2022. It begins with ambient noise, wind, distant traffic, the rustle of fabric. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., everything cuts out. For 13 seconds, there is only silence. And then, just as abruptly, a voice, soft, genderless, speaking in perfect English with no discernible accent, says, "We are sorry, it must be this way. You were never meant to wake up." The recording ends there. To this day, no one knows who made it or why. But here's what no one wants to admit. The prophecy wasn't wrong. It was precise. The end did come on December 21st, 1972 at 3:17 in the morning. But it wasn't the end of the world. It was the end of reality, at least, the reality we believed we inhabited. What followed wasn't destruction. It was replacement, a subtle, seamless overwrite. Like changing film in a projector while the audience watches, unaware, the image has shifted. Those who felt it, the ones who woke in terror, who sensed the absence, who saw the figure in the coat, they're the ones who almost broke through. And the ones who remember fragments, who carry the weight of knowing something is deeply off, they're not crazy, they're the survivors of a transition no one else acknowledges. And the worst part? It's still happening. Every year, the pause grows. Not enough for most to notice. But for those sensitive to the shift, the ones who've always felt out of step with the world, who dream in colors that don't exist, who hear music when no one is playing, it's becoming harder to ignore. Time doesn't flow the way it used to. Memories blur at the edges. Faces in photographs seem subtly wrong. Loved ones sometimes speak with slight delays, as if echoing from a room just out of reach. And in the deepest hollows of Appalachia, where the trees grow too close together and the fog never quite lifts, locals still avoid the old rail path after midnight. Hunters refuse to camp near the ruins of the stone chapel. And on cold December nights, when the wind howls just right, some swear they can hear faint chanting words in no known language, rising from beneath the earth. They say Thaddeus Vale didn't vanish, he was taken, not killed, not imprisoned, but promoted, given a role in whatever lies beyond the veil. And the notebook Lyra L left behind? It wasn't a record of the future, it was a ledger, a list of names, of souls who resisted the change, of those who might, one day, need to be corrected. So when you hear your clock tick strangely tonight, when your dog whimpers at nothing, when you wake suddenly, certain someone called your name, but no one's there, ask yourself, did the world survive 1972? Or did it merely continue pretending? The robber who never touched the floor and never got caught. In the winter of 1987, when snow fell like whispers over the city of Pittsburgh and street lamps flickered beneath a sky heavy with clouds, a man named Thaddeus Vale moved through the shadows with a silence so complete it defied belief. He wasn't tall, nor was he broad, just 5'9", wiry with fingers long enough to dance across piano keys or slip between window frames without a sound. His eyes, a pale gray like thawing ice, missed nothing. And though he stole from banks, jewelry stores, and even the homes of the wealthy in Shadyside and Fox Chapel, no one ever saw him run, no one ever heard his footsteps, and not a single footprint was ever found leading away from the scene. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? It started on a night thick with fog, the kind that clung to coat collars and muffled the distant wail of trains along the Monongahela River. The date was December 18th, just 3 days before Christmas. The First National Trust on Fifth Avenue had closed at 5, its vault sealed, alarms armed, security guards patrolling in pairs. Yet, by 10 past 2 in the morning, someone had bypassed every system without tripping a wire, without leaving fingerprints, without setting off motion detectors calibrated to sense the flutter of a moth's wing. What they found the next morning chilled the blood of the manager, a man named Harlan Wexford, who arrived at 6:30 sharp with coffee steaming in a paper cup. The front door was locked. The glass unbroken, the alarm panel glowed green, fully operational.
But inside, the vault stood open, its steel door yawning wide like a slack jaw. $200,000 in cash, mostly 20s and 50s, bundled in rubber bands, was gone. Also missing, a collection of rare gold coins appraised at over 400,000, belonging to a reclusive collector from Sewickley. And yet, there were no signs of forced entry, no scuff marks on the floor, no grease on the keypad, nothing. Only one thing puzzled the investigators more than the theft itself, the surveillance footage. On the tape, recorded from a camera mounted high in the corner of the lobby, there was no intruder, just darkness. Static. Then, at exactly 2:12 a.m., a flicker, a distortion, like heat rising from asphalt. For 3 seconds, the image warped. When it cleared, the vault door was slightly ajar. But no figure appeared, no hand reached in, no shadow passed. It was as if the money had simply decided to leave on its own. By midweek, newspapers across Pennsylvania carried the headline, "Phantom Thief Strikes Pittsburgh." Radio stations played eerie synth music behind breathless reports. Police Chief Lyle Mancini held a press conference, his voice tight with frustration, insisting that no man can walk through walls and vowing that the perpetrator would be caught. But deep down, even he felt a chill he couldn't explain. Because this wasn't the first time. 3 months earlier, in September of 1987, the Regal Jewelers on Walnut Street had been hit under nearly identical circumstances. Surveillance showed nothing. Alarms never sounded. The safe opened as if by magic. A string of black pearls, once worn by a silent film star, vanished without a trace. And again, no footprints. No fingerprints. No scent for K9 units to follow. Then, in November, it happened at the Carnegie Savings and Loan in Mount Lebanon. This time, a motion sensor near the back office did register something, but only for half a second. The reading? A weightless disturbance, like air shifting in a vacuum. Investigators dismissed it as equipment malfunction, but Thaddeus Vail knew better. He wasn't a criminal by birth, nor was he driven by greed. Born in a coal mining town in West Virginia Welch, population 3,000, he'd grown up in a house with no running water and a roof that leaked when it rained. His father died in a mine collapse when Thaddeus was 9. His mother worked double shifts at a diner, her hands cracked from dishwater and cold. By the time he was 16, he taught himself to pick locks, not because he wanted to steal, but because he needed medicine for his younger sister, Lyra, who suffered from seizures doctors said were nervous in origin and expensive to treat. His first break-in was clumsy, a pharmacy at midnight, gloves too big, heart pounding like a war drum. He took only what he needed, phenobarbital, syringes, a bottle of cod liver oil, left a note behind, written in careful script, "I will repay you." TV. No one ever came looking. Over the years, he grew quieter, faster, more precise. He studied architecture, mechanics, airflow patterns, and human behavior. He learned how to move without displacing air, how to step where pressure sensors weren't calibrated, how to exploit blind spots in infrared fields. But his greatest skill, his secret, was not technology. It was timing. Thaddeus didn't walk during heists. He floated. Not literally, of course, but close enough to fool machines, cameras, and instincts alike. Through a combination of controlled breathing, muscle relaxation, and an almost meditative state of balance, he could reduce his physical impact to near zero. He wore custom shoes lined with aerogel foam, lighter than air, insulating, silent. His clothing, tailored from a blend of synthetic fibers used in aerospace gear, absorbed light and muffled sound. He moved in rhythm with the building's natural vibrations, the hum of HVAC systems, the creak of settling beams, so that his presence became part of the background noise. And he never touched the floor. Not directly. Instead, he used a technique he called shadow stepping, placing each foot on the very edge of tiles, where grout met wall, or balancing on the lip of a baseboard, distributing his weight across multiple micropoints. In some cases, he'd enter through ventilation shafts, descending slowly on ropes made of braided Kevlar thread, thin as spider silk, strong as steel. He'd hang suspended above carpets, vaults, marble floors reaching down, with tools shaped like fishing rods to retrieve items without ever grounding himself. To the world, it seemed impossible. To him, it was survival. By early January of 1988, the FBI had assigned Agent Rhoda Keene to the case. A veteran of white-collar crime divisions, she'd transferred from Quantico after solving a series of art thefts in New Orleans using behavioral profiling. She was sharp, skeptical, and immune to sensationalism, but even she paused the first time she watched the grainy bank footage from Fifth Avenue. "There's no one there," she muttered, rewinding the tape for the 7th time. Her partner, Dale Haskins, leaned forward. "Maybe it's a glitch." "No," she said, voice low. "Look at the dust motes. See how they shift right before the vault opens? Something passed through. Something quiet." They began cross-referencing all previous unsolved thefts in the region. 8 in total, dating back to 1984. All shared the same pattern: no entry, no exit, no evidence. And in 6 of them, weather reports mentioned unusually dense fog on the night of the crime. Coincidence? Possibly. But then, on January 15th, 1988, the unthinkable happened again. This time, it was the home of Arthur Pembroke, a retired steel magnate living in a gated estate in Sewickley Heights. The mansion had 20 rooms, a private gallery, and a security system designed by a former CIA contractor. Motion sensors, laser grids, thermal imaging, everything. At 1:43 in the morning, the system registered a temperature fluctuation in the east wing. Not enough to trigger an alert, just a brief dip like a breath against glass. When Pembroke's housekeeper arrived at 7, she found the display case in the study shattered, not broken outward, but inward, as if crushed from within. Missing, a platinum pocket watch engraved with the coordinates of the Titanic's final resting place, and a letter signed by Thomas Edison promising collaboration on a wireless illumination device. Again, no prints, no alarms, no sign of struggle, but this time there was something new. On the marble floor, just beneath the shattered glass, lay a single playing card. The Queen of Spades, flipped face up. Agent Keene stared at it in the evidence photo, her pulse quickening. "He's communicating," she whispered. Haskins frowned. "With whom?" "With us," she said. "Or maybe with someone else." She ordered a full forensic sweep of all prior crime scenes, anything left behind, no matter how insignificant. And 2 days later, in a dusty envelope from the Regal Jewelers case, they found it a matchbook from a diner in Clarksburg, West Virginia. On the back, scribbled in pencil, "For Lyra. Soon." Keene traced the diner's records. Only one person had asked for directions to Welch that week, a man matching Thaddeus Vale's description, paying an exact change, wearing a long coat and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She flew to West Virginia the next morning. Welch was a ghost of its former self, storefronts boarded up, miners out of work, children playing in empty lots where company houses once stood. She found the Vale residence, easily a sagging frame house on Sycamore Street, paint peeling, porch steps rotted, no lights on, no car in the driveway, but smoke curled from the chimney. She knocked. Silence. Then, the soft click of a lock. The door opened just enough to reveal a woman, thin, pale, wrapped in a wool blanket. Her eyes were red, her hair tied back with a frayed ribbon. "Yes?" she asked, voice hoarse. "Mrs. Vale," Keene said gently. "I'm Special Agent Rhoda Keene, FBI. I'm looking for your son, Thaddeus." The woman didn't flinch, didn't gasp, just exhaled slowly, like someone releasing a burden. "He's not here," she said, "and he won't come back." "Why not?" "Because he's done what he needed to do." Keene stepped forward. "Ma'am, your son is suspected in multiple thefts, over $1 million in losses. People are scared. We need to talk to him." The woman smiled faintly. "Talk to him? You think he'd let you catch him? You think he leaves tracks because he wants to be found?" She opened the door wider. Inside, the room was sparse wood stove, cot, bookshelf, crammed with engineering manuals and old medical journals. On the wall, a map of Pittsburgh was pinned with tiny red dots, each marking a location of a theft. But in the center, a photograph. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, smiling beside a hospital bed. A caption beneath, handwritten, "Lyra's first seizure-free year. She's alive," the woman said softly. "Thanks to him, the medicine, the specialists, the treatments they said we could never afford. He gave her time. 5 years. She passed last April. Peacefully." Keene felt her throat tighten. "And now?" she asked. "Now he's gone," the mother said. "Where? I don't know. Maybe helping someone else. Maybe just
resting. She handed Keen a small box wrapped in brown paper. This came yesterday. No return address. Just your name. Keen opened it. Inside, the Edison letter, the Titanic watch, and a note on thin stationery. Return these. They were borrowed. T.V. No arrest warrant was ever served. No trial convened. The FBI closed the case in March of 1988, citing insufficient evidence and lack of identifiable suspect. The media moved on. The public forgot. But in quiet corners among locksmiths, security consultants, and urban legends whispered in police academies, Thaddeus Vale became myth. They say he still moves. On nights when fog rolls in from the rivers, when the wind carries the scent of coal and frost, some claim to see a figure drifting past windows, never casting a shadow, never making a sound. They say he doesn't steal anymore. They say he helps. A wallet returned to a college student who lost it on the T. A stack of bills slipped under the door of a family facing eviction, a prescription filled anonymously at a pharmacy in McKeesport, and sometimes, if you look closely at the snow-covered ground after such events, you'll notice something strange. No footprints. Just the faint impression of edges like someone walked on the very border of the world, never quite landing, never touching, never caught, and perhaps never meant to be.
The stories. Phone recording documented their final minutes. The file that surfaced last winter was short and brutal, and local dispatch confirmed the voices matched a missing maintenance pair. Greta Lyle, 32, a small-town reporter, listened 3 times before writing anything because the last minute hid everything important. Greta lived in a valley where the hills felt close and the roads curled between pines that ate cell bars after mile 6. Her editor wanted a follow-up on the county's mothballed call boxes, and she planned a simple piece about budgets and weathered steel. The plan changed when a man left a padded envelope at the office desk, and the receptionist slid it toward Greta. Inside lay a cheap thumb drive and a handwritten note that said, "Play it now," which was not exactly subtle guidance. The audio began with tires crushing wet grit and a fan belt squeal, then a breathy laugh that carried a little nervous catch. A woman said, "Hit record anyway," and a man replied, "We will just send it to Burgess later," and gravel pinged the undercarriage. Greta paused there and rewound because archived calls mentioned a supply clerk named Burgess, and the tone was easy routine. Dispatch had logged their crew leaving the yard after lunch, and the destination was a ranger turnout near a decommissioned radio tower. The county named them as Mara Keene, 29, and Colby Ash, 33. Both contract road technicians paid hourly wages. They were fixing marker posts along a flood reroute where tourists kept missing the detour, according to a memo Greta later obtained. She kept a yellow notebook, and she recorded exact timestamps straight from the audio, then cross-matched with the dispatch exit time. Static rose and fell like weak FM, which fit a corridor where the timber wall trapped signals, something locals complain about every spring. The woman on the file spoke again, and her voice changed colors like people do when they feel watched, but pretend they do not. "Do you see that cone?" she asked, and the man said, "Not our brand." Then the truck door chirped, then another small, impatient silence. 2 clicks sounded like metal against plastic, which Greta later matched to the folding rod used to set reflective stakes at bends. A train horn cried far away with 2 short blasts, then 1, and Greta wrote that pattern down and circled it 3 times. A witness told her a freight line hugs the river, and the drainage there creates its own echo that stacks horns out strangely. If the pattern matched that schedule, she could place the recording on a map within minutes, which is all any timeline really needs. At 23 minutes in, a male voice new to the scene drifted across the microphone, thin and half-carried by the wind. "You folks need a hookup," he said. And a second voice we never hear again muttered something that sounded like numbers and road letters. Greta paused again and wrote an underline under the word hookup because that is tow slang, and Colby worked nights at an actual wrecker. He would not pay cash for a roadside pull unless something felt wrong, and the county did not call contractors to rescue their own truck. Colby said, "We are good," and the stranger answered, "Road is closed ahead," which matched a rumor about impassable washouts that week. Greta called the county shop and asked about the washouts, and a foreman said the road was soft but open with flagged cones.
The file captured an engine idling close, and a beeper chirped 3 times, the exact rhythm used by older reverse alarms on flatbeds. A chain clinked against a bumper, and the woman whispered, "We should go." Then the phone scuffed fabric as someone reset their grip. Greta listened to that fabric sound again and again because the microphone scraped a zipper, which gave brand and suggested jacket style. She went to the surplus store and found county-issued windbreakers with chunky metal pulls that rasp exactly like the noise at 19. The envelope had no return address, but courier records put it at a copy shop where a camera watched the counter until closing time. The clerk remembered a man with a field jacket and a gray cap, and he bought a single USB stick with cash and no receipt. Greta did not print that part, and she did not share it with anyone besides her editor, because he asked for caution and patience. Instead, she drove the turnout on a weekday afternoon and brought a friend who knew rail schedules. Then they listened at the shoulder. The freight line sang through the ravine, and the horn called twice, then once, and the echo folded back with the same aching cadence. She drew a circle over the map where that sound best fit, then paced off the shoulder and found a rut that bit deep and straight. Down the slope, hidden by alder, lay an abandoned call box faceplate with new screws driven into old holes, clean and too shiny. The county had removed the boxes after a storm in 2019, and crews reported salvage thieves yanking wire for quick cash. Greta photographed the screws and the plate, then noted fresh shoe prints with a square heel that looked like a hardware store special. Her phone had no bars, so she returned to town and requested traffic camera pulls for the nearest intersection where coverage still worked. A state tech sent stills from a ridge camera that framed taillights heading toward the turnout after midday in a light, steady rain. One frame showed a retired tow truck with faded lettering, and the next showed the county pickup tucked behind it like a shy cousin. Greta played the audio again and caught a faint double click at 29, the sound of a handheld radio powering and squelching. That detail mattered because the county monitors one frequency while tow outfits use another, and she recognized the wrong hiss entirely. She interviewed a grocery clerk who stocked drinks near the bin of hand warmers, and he remembered selling 2 sleeves to a road tech. The receipt time sat within 10 minutes of the exit log, and his detail about the jacket patch matched the issued windbreakers perfectly. A bartender at the junction recalled a flatbed guy bragging about his old badge from a volunteer rescue club that folded years ago. He liked to flash it to get lanes cleared, and he kept a coil of chain in the cab, and he always smelled like 2 cycle gas. Greta ran the plate fragments from the ridge stills through a spreadsheet of county surplus auctions, and one number set rang familiar. A retired truck had been sold to a seasonal contractor 5 years back, and that contractor worked grading crews through 3 winters. She asked the yard boss for copies of work orders and found add-ons for road closures that never reached the public board for posting. 3 were billed to a line called Emergency Barricade Verification, which can pass quiet if everyone is cold and trying to go home. Greta returned to the file and let the final minute run without a pause, and the sound tightened like a knot being cinched hard. "Back it down," said the stranger, and another voice said, "Winch." Then the engine strained, then the woman whispered, "No, wait, please." Her phone captured boots on gravel and a hollow shutter like a box panel being struck by a fist, then a clatter of chain settling again. Colby said, "We are leaving," and the stranger replied, "Road is closed." Then something metallic squealed, and the microphone hit the seat. Greta recognized the squeal later when a mechanic showed her a retired foot brake on that model, which locks if someone yanks hard. A second engine revved and then drifted away, and the train horn cried again, which pinned the window tighter than any wristwatch could. The file ended with water, sound, and wind, and then a barely audible sentence that a lab enhanced for the sheriff before the case closed. A female voice whispered, "He is not alone," which fits the bartender's story, and one traffic still that shows a second vehicle tailing the flatbed. Greta never wrote the name of the contractor who later died in a solo wreck on a dirt connector above the timberline in early spring. The county cited the company for unpermitted closure devices, and a civil suit settled quietly after an insurance review and sealed filings. The recording was cited in the settlement as contemporaneous documentation, which means the phone created a timeline that prosecutors trust completely. It helped link unreported cones, a counterfeit call box faceplate, and an old truck beeper that chirped a signature three-note pattern. Greta visited the turnout one more time when the snow melted, and she stood where the ruts cut dark through the alder roots. She listened for horns and for chain, and she watched the waterline move, and she wrote names she would never print anywhere. A retired dispatcher took her call and confirmed that a training tape from 2015 uses the same three beeper chirps. It teaches rookies to ignore unauthorized closures unless a county badge verifies, because anyone can buy cones and a safety vest. Greta asked him what he remembered most from long nights watching a map blink, and he said mistakes always make more sound than luck. He said a good tech marks those sounds. Then he asked if she could hear her own pencil scratching when she replayed the last minute. She told him yes, and she told him about the zipper scrape that matched the metal pull, and he laughed, then he went quiet. He said that noise meant the person tried to pocket the phone without breaking the recording, which is a trick dispatchers teach. The bartender called once more and said a woman had started bringing flowers to the turnout, and she left them at the alder cut. He asked if Greta thought the woman was family, and Greta said she did not know and that strangers honor strangers more than most. The editor killed 2 paragraphs about the towing club because it would invite noise, and he preferred the clean arc of small clues. Greta agreed, because the point was not a club or a badge or a wreck, but the way ordinary objects built a clear end. She listened one last time and heard something she had missed, which happens when minds want answers and forget to trust the quiet. The very first second carried a shy sigh like people make when they press record and pretend they are not scared of new evidence. Greta printed that detail and moved it near the top, and she explained that simple acts create proof that survives strangers and storms. She never used the word hero, and she never used wild language, and she left the title to her editor, who kept things plain. When the story ran, the county announced a permanent fund for roadside beacons that log closures to a public map without excuses. Visitors call it the green light board, and techs call it the quiet wall, and the valley calls it the keen rule. Greta keeps the thumb drive in a small drawer, and she checks the timestamps now and then, and they have not changed. She believes the last decision Mara and Colby made was to document, and that choice laid stepping stones across a very dark place. The valley will always have roads that curl into quiet, and someone will always think cones look official when no one is watching. She writes that the recording made their last minutes heavier than memory, which fades and bends, and lighter than rumor, which never ends. On clear nights, the ravine carries sound like a wire, and 2 short horn calls followed by one still tag the hour. Greta parks on the shoulder, keeps her phone in her pocket, and lets the quiet work without her voice explaining every piece. The story of the thumb drive is not about a monster in the trees or a curse pinned to bad weather. It is about a phone and a breath, and the way background noises can draw a map that people can follow later. She ends notes with a sentence she never printed, because printed promises feel heavier than memory deserves when strangers are gone. Someone pressed record, and someone stayed brave for long enough, and the evidence they made did not let the valley forget. The preacher's doomsday calendar was wrong except for one date. In the quiet town of Harlan, nestled deep within the Appalachian foothills of eastern Kentucky, a man named Thaddeus Vale once stood atop a rusted grain silo on the edge of an abandoned farm, his arms outstretched beneath a bruised twilight sky. It was the autumn of 1998, and the air carried the scent of damp earth and burning leaves, crisp with the promise of change, or so he claimed. Clad in a long charcoal-colored coat that fluttered like crow's wings in the wind, Thaddeus held aloft a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with intricate diagrams, celestial alignments, and what he called the true calendar of divine reckoning. He wasn't a pastor in any official denomination, nor did he preach from a pulpit, but people came all the same, drawn by whispers, by fear, by a hunger for certainty in uncertain times. He spoke not in sermons, but in riddles wrapped in prophecy, warning that the world would end in stages, each date marked by fire, flood, or silence. The first, he said, would come on the 3rd day of April, 2001, a great falling from the sky, a judgment upon the proud towers of men. Then, on the 9th day of July, 2003, rivers would run black and the stars would blink out for 7 hours. By the winter solstice of 2005, he declared, every mirror in the world would crack at exactly 3:17 in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. His followers, numbering nearly 400 at their peak, sold homes, quit jobs, and gathered in communal shelters built from scrap wood and salvaged metal, waiting. But none of it happened. April passed without incident. July brought only heat and thunderstorms. On that winter morning in 2005, people woke to find their mirrors intact, their coffee still warm, the world stubbornly ordinary. Disillusionment spread like frost across a window pane. Families left, supplies dwindled, the shelters fell into disrepair, overtaken by kudzu and foxes. Thaddeus himself vanished shortly after, last seen boarding a Greyhound bus bound for Memphis, his journal tucked beneath his arm, his eyes hollow with something between regret and defiance. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Now, fast forward to the spring of 2023. A young archivist named Elwyn Price, originally from Asheville, North Carolina, though raised mostly in rural Ohio, was sorting through a donation box at the Ossuary Archive in Lexington, a little-known repository for forgotten religious texts and apocalyptic ephemera. Among crumbling pamphlets and hand-drawn star charts, she found it. Thaddeus Vale's journal, its spine cracked, its pages brittle as dried petals. At first, she paid it little mind, just another relic of millennial panic, another voice lost to time. But then, late one rainy Tuesday night, she flipped to the final page. There, in faded ink, was a single line written in a trembling hand. And when all else has failed, look to the 7th hour of the 13th day of October, 2023. That one I saw clearly. Elwyn paused. She checked the date on her phone. October 13th, 2023, exactly 1 week away. She told no one at first. Not her supervisor, Dr. Calix Renner, a stern man with wire-rimmed glasses who believed fervently in cataloging, not interpreting. Not even her roommate, a folk musician named Jory, who played a battered upright bass and claimed to speak in dreams with dead jazz trumpeters. But she couldn't let it go. There was something about the phrasing, the specificity, the weight of it. It didn't sound like the rambling of a madman. It sounded like a confession. So she began to dig. Thaddeus had based his calendar on a blend of numerology, obscure biblical exegesis, and astronomical cycles, particularly the precession of the equinoxes and the rare alignment of Jupiter and Saturn known as the Great Conjunction. Most of his calculations were flawed, built on misreadings of ancient texts and self-invented ciphers. But this final date, October 13th, 2023, coincided with nothing major in the astronomical record. No eclipse, no meteor shower, no planetary alignment of significance. And yet Elwyn noticed something strange. On that exact day, at precisely 7 o'clock in the evening Eastern Daylight Time, the moon would be at perigee, the closest point to Earth in its orbit, and positioned directly over the central United States. At that moment, the sun would have just set in Harlan, Kentucky. Coincidence? Perhaps. But then she found a second clue. Buried in an old police report from November of 2005, a year after Thaddeus disappeared, a deputy in Harlan County mentioned investigating a small fire at the remains of one of the doomsday shelters. Inside, scorched but legible, was a chalkboard with the same date, October 13th, 2023. Beneath it, someone had written, "It isn't destruction, it's remembrance." Elwyn's breath caught. She booked a train to Harlan. The journey took nearly 10 hours, winding through the Blue Ridge Mountains, past coal towns with sagging porches, and churches painted white with peeling trim. When she arrived, the air was thick with the smell of pine and distant rain. Autumn had already begun to paint the hills in amber and rust. She checked into a modest inn called the Hollow Pines Motel, room number 6, where the heater rattled and the curtains smelled faintly of mildew. That evening, she drove out to the old shelter site, guided by GPS and a hand-drawn map she'd copied from the journal. The structure was gone, only a concrete slab remained, half swallowed by ivy and wild blackberry vines. But
As she stepped onto it, something shifted in the air. A stillness. A hush, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. She pulled out her phone, opened the voice recorder, and whispered, "It's October 12th. Tomorrow at 7 p.m., I'll be back." She returned at 6:45 the next evening. The sky was overcast, pale gray, streaked with violet at the edges. A cool wind moved through the trees, making the leaves shiver like hands in prayer. She sat on the edge of the slab, her jacket pulled tight, watching the minutes tick by on her watch. 6:52. 6:55. 6:58. At 6:59, the wind stopped. Not gradually, not fading. It ceased as if cut by a blade. Silence pressed down, thick and unnatural. No birds, no crickets. Even the distant hum of a highway seemed to vanish. Her pulse quickened. She glanced around, half expecting shadows to move on their own. Then, at exactly 7 p.m., a single tone echoed through the valley, low, resonant, like a bell struck deep underground. It lasted only 3 seconds, then faded, and just as quickly, the wind returned, rustling the branches, breaking the stillness. Elowen stood frozen, her skin prickled. She reached into her bag and pulled out a portable spectrum analyzer she'd borrowed from a physics professor friend, something meant to detect electromagnetic anomalies. To her astonishment, it had recorded a brief spike in low-frequency waves at exactly 7 o'clock frequency, matching no known natural source, and lasting precisely 2.8 seconds. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. Was it man-made, a military test, a geological event, or was it impossibly something else? She spent the next 6 months chasing answers. She interviewed elderly locals who remembered Thaddeus Vale, some with reverence, others with scorn. One woman, Mavis Cray, who had been 16 when the shelters were built, recalled seeing Thaddeus standing alone at midnight on New Year's Eve, 2000, staring at the stars and weeping. He kept saying, "I got most of it wrong, but one day I saw it clear." Another man, a retired geologist named Silas Tovey, confirmed that the region sat atop a network of ancient quartz veins, minerals known to amplify electromagnetic signals under certain conditions. Could Thaddeus have known? Had he discovered something by accident, by vision, by madness that science had yet to explain? Elowen published her findings in a small academic journal, careful not to claim proof, only possibility. She titled it Anomalous Temporal Events and the Psychology of Prophetic Failure. It garnered little attention except from one person. A letter arrived at the archive 6 weeks later, postmarked from Boise, Idaho. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typewritten, "You were there. I saw you on the slab. You heard it too. I've waited 20 years. He told me it would happen only once. Only for those who believed enough to doubt. Tell me, did you feel it?" Not sound, not vibration, but memory. As if the world remembered something it had forgotten. No signature. Just that. Elowen never replied. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the streetlights flicker outside her window in Columbus, where she now lives, she opens the journal again. She runs her fingers over that final line. That one, I saw clearly. And she wonders, was it a hoax? A delusion? Or did Thaddeus Vale, in all his flawed brilliance, truly glimpse one moment not of destruction, but of resonance? A single date when time bent just enough for something to slip through? Not the end of the world, but a whisper from it. Think about that. What if the apocalypse isn't fire and ruin? What if it's a moment so quiet, so precise, that only the ones who are truly listening will ever know it happened? And what if it already did? October 13th, 2023, 7 o'clock in the evening, Eastern Daylight Time. In a field in Kentucky, beneath a motionless sky, a tone rang out, brief, unexplained, undeniable. And somewhere, perhaps, Thaddeus Vale smiled. Because even prophets get things wrong. But sometimes, just once, they're right. And when they are, the world doesn't end. It simply pauses and listens.